each one of these topics we could go in like and just discuss hours about it. What's interesting about what you said is it's a simple method relatively, which can have such deep impact, not just on reforestation, on biodiversity, on food safety, on water security, but also in helping rebuild a lot of these communities, right, which have been devastated because of monocropping, because of, let's say, war, civil war. What this technology actually starts to build is not just what those immediate impacts are, but in fact, long-term stability for particular societies and countries as well, because then you start to be able to extend that value creation, whether it's actually helping women, stabilizing family structures, creating more economic wealth for the country, et cetera, et cetera. And there are far-reaching consequences, which makes this actually a beautiful solution and so inspiring. Which countries have been implementing this technology successfully around the world?
China.
China.
Yeah, China is producing machinery to a lot of different pyrolysis systems to create biochar. China is very conscious of their environmental problems, also because they have just a thin strip of land by the coast, which is fertile. And that land is getting less and less fertile every year. I was asked to work, and I spent 3 years in China, going back and forth, on the green belt around Beijing, which is the largest artificial forest in the world, afforestation project. There's going to be something like 50 billion trees planted. But they are planted. I don't know how many of them are not that successful in getting them to survive, which is why when they discovered biochar, they realized that this, by adding biochar to the soil, their reforestation projects would be much more successful. Trees would survive, would grow faster, and would survive much better the challenges of being planted on the edges of the Gobi Desert, for instance. And so they are also using biochar and exporting it around on the Silk Road project. So they are bringing the technology and the know-how with them. In the Northern Europe, Germany especially, is also very engaged, and Switzerland. And in Europe, we use biochar as an animal feed primarily. That's the main use of it, because it, given to cows, for instance, they gain weight and produce more milk and use less, are healthier, so use less antibiotics. And I have a friend in Switzerland who indeed gives it to cows and puts it on the floor of stables, and the cows pee and shit on it, and all of that is thrown into compost, and you have the most powerful compost in the world, which is inoculated. And so, there are examples, individual examples, and I think over the last 3 years, we've seen, even in the US, a greater awareness of the importance of our soil. There's a wonderful documentary, I think, called Kiss the Ground on Netflix about that.
Yes, that's right.
And about how, we're not going to survive as a species. Forget about, our planet has bad fever. But if we cannot grow food at scale in a safe and environmentally sound way, we're not going to survive. And it's not
Absolutely.
through, aquaculture that we're going to feed whatever we are, 9 billion people by 2050, So I'm, for instance, now working with some friends in the cannabis and hemp industry
Hmm.
about taking what for them is waste, the stalks and the bark of the plant, and turning that into biochar and putting it back into the grounds. And we've already seen increases of 200% in the active, what called secondary metabolites of plants. And it creates a circular, there's no waste, everything is
Right.
reused.
Zero waste.
And it makes, this whole concept of circularity, which
Mhm.
is throughout nature, is right there for us to use. And biochar is a wonderful way to do it. Also because we're going to get paid in the next few years. Already we are through carbon credits because biochar is carbon. It's about 80% carbon. So when you take carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, um, then if we let those plants rot on the ground, they go back, that all those gases, CO2 and others gases, greenhouse gases go back into the atmosphere. If instead you take agricultural waste or trees which have been destroyed by bacteria, like the olive trees in the Mediterranean or trees on the Pacific coast, and turn that into biochar, and you put it in the ground, not only does it increase yields, you're actually sequestering carbon, and thus you get credits from the voluntary carbon market, which can be used to decrease your costs. So
Hmm.
not only are you farmers decrease the cost because they don't use artificial inputs like pesticides,
Hmm. Herbicides, pesticides, all kinds
fertilizers,
of
and so on,
toxic chemicals,
herbicides,
right?
which are terrible.
Hmm.
And the worst case of that kind of agriculture for me is really what happened in India when DuPont and Monsanto
Hmm.
brought and marketed genetically engineered cotton seeds. And they did it very effectively, marketing. What happened, however, is that over 110,000 farmers committed suicide because after a few years, it was unsustainable. It was too expensive. And they lost their family farms they had for generation, and out of desperation committed suicide, very often by drinking the pesticide. So it is one of the things that American media never talks about, but it is an example of this industrial extractive approach to agriculture and to life, if you want, which
Well,
is profit driven and which
it's
is,
part of patriarchy, unfortunately. You know, that's part of the ideology,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. We're
You
not
make
wellness, we should be a
no,
wellness oriented society for individually and collectively. Our laws should be judged on how much wellness does
right.
this law create, right? Not for a special interest group, but for the community. It's not,
Absolutely.
it's not that
Absolutely.
complicated. It's just
But
an
that
ethical,
I mean, that is a reflection. Everything we see at the moment is really a reflection of our collective beliefs, right? And what our values are. And it's, if anything, this last year and this current moment that we live in is really showing us again, it's like this is what we created collectively. Whether you agree with it or not, do we want this to be our future? Do we want to continue in this manner? And if not, we do have to, we have to wake up to that. And many people have, and then many have not. And we're in this situation. One of the things that you said earlier, which, again, back to how disconnected we are from nature, right? Because if we if we just simply put ourselves there, spend some time on a farm, spend some time in the mountains, in the jungle, and really observe, and you will see that cyclical effect, right? That in fact, again, back to the whole idea that a lot of times the solutions we seek to create more abundance, to create more health and wellness, to address issues like poverty, climate change, deforestation, food and water security, is actually to look to nature, which if we just observe it and understand how these are systems, these are not linear, hierarchical, one way streets. It's always cyclical. And when we can understand how each of the pieces fit in, we can actually perpetuate that abundance without excess toll on lives, on communities, on our health. And, I want to tie together your branding experience with what you're talking about here, because I think what you've said to me before is how there's such a disconnect between, okay, here I am, let's say corporate CEOs, and, whether it's, CSR, corporate social responsibility programs, or, even in a bigger way, perhaps for multinationals that are looking to kind of deploy some of their capital in an area that makes sense. How do you tell the story, right? Because there still is this, and I do not think this is accurate at all. I don't think this is fair at all. But there's this idea that, okay, either you're helping the earth or you're actually making money, right? And there's this completely illogical cognitive dissonance that's happening, and that's simply not true. And one of the very interesting things about green charcoal biochar is that, again, it hits all those multiple bottom lines that are not just about profit, but about environmentalism, sustainability, actually saving lives, and actually being, as a standalone business itself, that's one thing. And there's tons of potential there, but also you talk about carbon credits, right? So there's this way of telling the story, and shifting from cost to investment, and to understanding these returns from this investment. Not only do you have to question whether or not it will return monetary value, but it will in fact return that plus so many other things. And you know who is telling that story? How are you telling that story
Hmm.
to change minds? Because
Yeah.
these are belief systems. These
Yeah.
are just
Yeah.
belief
Well, I
systems.
think there is a pent up demand for solutions. I mean, there are enough people meeting at Davos, or enough CEOs in Davos who are all saying, we're ready to embrace a new vision, a new approach, and so on. And then they go back home and they're still debating issues around shareholder values, stakeholder values, and things of that nature. So I've been following the whole impact investing movement for over a decade, and have friends who are very actively involved in that. And I hear a lot of goodwill. But then there's no follow through, because
Mhm.
money still sits in Swiss banks or wherever, in London banks. And when you say, well, what are you doing with your money? We're doing this little project here, with little project there, and a lot of it seems to me like another form of greenwashing. It's financial
Mhm.
greenwashing, if you want. In the impact community, there is, we don't have the metrics, and as if metrics were the salvation of the financial community. If metrics were that good, we would have not, we would have all predicted a 2008 crisis, right? But so metrics to me doesn't sound like a very good excuse to hold back. Uh, our engagement or the engagement of financial community. So what we've done is we've developed a model of blended finance, which we are partnering with the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, which is the World Bank's investment arm, to develop. And that takes impact capital, sometimes from multilateral institutions like the IFC, which finances multi-billion-dollar projects around the world, and takes 20% of philanthropy, or 20% of that investment sum as philanthropy, but packages philanthropy as a way of de-risking the investment, which we're trying to speak in their language,
Right. Exactly.
addressing their concerns and their um, paradigm, if you want, inside.
Hmm.
Um, the 80% is then designed to be used as a accelerator for social environmental positive changes. Um, the so in other words, what after 35 years of working with philanthropy, we've kind of come to understand that as a model, it doesn't really work very well. It may work very well there's a place for it, but um, but on the whole, you will not achieve the changes that we need to achieve at scale and fast enough to address the incredible speed at which some of these changes, like our climate crisis, are happening. Um, so we are now trying to align ourselves with a profit motive or market forces. Um, and I'm self-censoring myself and using kind of more polite ways of saying it, but and hoping that we can uh, present to the financial community projects which are very profitable from a financial point of view, and from our point of view, which actually bring about social and environmental changes. So a lot of companies right now, Google, Microsoft, many more, even banks like Goldman Sachs are investing to offset their climate footprint. Um, and wonderful, it's, a step in the right direction, but that's a cost for them.
Hmm.
And so, as such, it's seen as, well, yeah, we need to do it. Our shareholders are demanding it, our consumers are demanding it. We have a reputational risk we need to address. Um, so it works up to a certain point. Our approach is indeed not to ask them to fund long-term projects like forestation, which are necessary and important because every year we have a net loss of 10 billion trees on this planet. Um, and needless to say, but I'll say it, trees really do help absorb CO2 and fix it for 70, 80 years. Uh, the problem of that is that it takes 10 years for a new forest to start being a positive force in terms of carbon sequestration. So where we're moving today, and this is my second week into this project, and we're launching something called African green charcoal, which is, we know that charcoal is responsible for 70% of the deforestation. We know that um, it's getting harder and harder for women to walk to a forest and bring home firewood
Hmm.
with which to cook, right? The forest used to be like probably 15, 20 miles from Dakar. Now it's 200 miles from Dakar. And women used to have children to help them carry firewood. An immense amount of their time
Right.
was devoted to
Well,
just
plus
that.
it's a dangerous journey. It's not just the distance, it's also the danger that they will encounter. Uh,
And forests, and it's dangerous and getting more dangerous every
mhm.
year, and they have to travel farther, and so it creates all kinds of local problems, but it also creates problems in terms of biodiversity loss, but also in what I think I call zoonotic, and I still haven't learned that well, diseases, which are the
Yes.
diseases that pass from animals to humans, like Ebola, like COVID-19.
Hmm.
So the more you cut the rainforest, the more of those viruses, which mostly live on the canopy, um, will
Absolutely.
enter
Yeah.
into
Because
contact.
we're intruding into yes, and then we're basically releasing those particular species of viruses and bacteria that
Yeah,
we've never encountered before and we don't have natural
100
immunity to.
years ago, you would have somebody in Uganda die from it.
Right.
Now, their
It's on a
neighbor
mass scale.
catches a plane and is in New York in,
Yeah.
12 hours. So you cannot isolate, it's not that easy to isolate things. So this is a charcoal in Africa. It's the second largest business in Africa after oil, bigger than diamonds. The prices are going up, population is exploding, urbanization is exploding, so the use of charcoal is becoming more and more important. And 600,000 women and children die each year from breathing those fumes.
Mhm.
There are like 500 of, I know actually somebody was telling me there are close to 5,000 times the air pollution inside African huts, whatever you want to call them, is like 5,000 times the acceptable level in Europe or the US. Um, so you have a potential here of taking agricultural waste, turning it into biochar, compressing the biochar, substituting that, which is now 40% less expensive than traditional charcoal, using
Which
the
is an
same
important point. Yes.
distribution system,
Hmm.
but helping women's cooperatives to take a part, a role, a financial role into all of this. And adding to that the fact that our machines create electricity and that carbon credits come to play. And so we could bring down the price of charcoal way below 50% of the existing
Mm.
price, uh, with all the social and environmental advantages that implies. But we could also take part of the profits of those projects and use them to teach farmers, especially agronomists, who then go out and teach other farmers, which we've been doing, but we can do this at scale throughout Africa and, Far East and so on, and make this incredibly profitable. And so for companies like Amazon or Goldman Sachs, which have devoted hundreds of millions of dollars to offset carbon emissions, um, all of a sudden we are proposing to them that they can look at this as an investment and not a cost.
Hmm.
In other words, they can make money, reinvest the profits in the local community, hopefully they will, and take the carbon credits for themselves. 1 ton of green charcoal is equivalent of 4 tons of CO2 reduction, of the value of CO2 reduction. Um, so, eventually, as the price of carbon sequestration increases on the international carbon markets,
Hmm.
and it's already, you can get $150 per ton of biochar um, from Scandinavian markets, we could do 4 times that with green charcoal. So it's incredibly profitable.
Incredible. Yeah.
Um, and it just so happens to save hundreds of thousands of lives.
Right.
And, and have all these other good effects, keep those forests that we need. They're our lungs.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, we forget. I mean, I said something earlier about, the earth, and then I said, it doesn't matter. It's the planet will go on. We will go extinct. The planet does not really need us to go on. I mean, this is at the end of the day helping us. It's enlightened self-interest,
Yeah.
right? And again, in the in the spirit of enlightened self-interest, that never excludes the economic side of things, right? So having economic abundance and having that profitability built in is actually very key to making this solution actually sustainable. So again, on the other side of the argument, the oftentimes we don't talk about this, but it's very important. And so your solution that you're proposing with African green charcoal and biochar in general is extraordinary and so timely and so important and necessary for us right now. Where can we find you? How can we learn more about what you're doing and about Pronatura?
Pronatura.org
Okay.
is one way. The other way, that's not a very updated website. I've put 1millionforests.org website up, which is about this, where there's a whole section on biochar and green charcoal. I just wanted to add another thing, and that was that I remembered, I was thinking this morning about this conversation, and I was thinking about meeting Buckminster Fuller. I was like 21 years old. I was in London. I was at Oxford, but I was in London. He was giving a talk.
Very envious. Yeah.
And I went to see him. And I was blown away. I didn't understand half of what he talked about. My mind was like an overdrive, smoke coming out of my ears. But I took a couple of things with me from that meeting. One was the importance of systemic thinking, of thinking of systems and interconnectedness of things. And the other thing was a trim tab factor. And I don't know if you've heard that, but the trim tab is the second rudder.
Yes, that's right. Where you move a little bit and it
rudder that you
moves the
put
entire.
behind the big rudder.
Right.
That small little rudder
Yes.
will allow the big tanker to turn on itself, or anyway, turn a
Right.
lot more effectively. So it's a metaphor about how a small, what is the most effective small intervention which can bring the biggest amount of change. And it truly marked my life and a lot of other people's lives, that thinking. And to me, biochar and green charcoal are an obvious trim tab factor.
Mm.
And we need to at the same time look at what we call waste, and look at it as a raw material, because systemic in nature and in systemic thinking, there's no waste. Everything is a raw material for something else. Everything can be used for life. We need to develop a biophilic consciousness.
Absolutely.
Love of life.
Love of life.
And
love of life.
And
which, by the way, we naturally are. We're set up that way. As human beings, we naturally are biophilic.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes been conditioned out of us in some ways.
Yeah.
Not actually, but in habitually.
Malthus. It's a misunderstood
yes
concept of Darwinism. If I'm not a big fish, I'll get eaten up.
That's right.
There's not enough for everybody. That's Malthus.
So true.
Well, Malthus didn't know about refrigeration and canning, but we do have solutions. We have
Absolutely.
easy solutions. We spend an enormous amount of time reinventing the wheel. Look at the NGOs redoing the same thing over and over and over, not learning from one another, competing with one another. I have
Hmm.
horrible stories of competition with other NGOs, which is it's much worse than in the
I know,
corporate.
I understand. Yes, absolutely. And all I can say is thank you for that, for the trim tab metaphor, and also just a reminder to all of us that no matter how sometimes dark the times are, sometimes um, you know how easily we can be prone to pessimism, that in fact we just need to open our eyes and understand what's already out there that we're not seeing. And this is one of the big pieces, what you just discussed. How can we support you further?
Ah. I would suggest that each one of us look at what they can do, because we are collectively feeling totally disempowered before what look like enormous problems which we cannot do anything about. No? So I think this consciousness has been nurtured quite
Hmm.
consciously um, by oil industry and other,
Absolutely.
talk around climate. There is a strategy to put the emphasis on things like recycling bottles and so on, and we've spent, and which is a good thing to do, but we spend a lot of energy doing that. Meanwhile, our house is on fire.
Hmm.
Um, so I think um, that obviously anybody has any ideas, any suggestions, energy to bring about change which is aligned with us, get in touch with me. Easy enough through pronatura.org, through 1millionforest.org. Um, but beyond that, I think there is a real opportunity to bring about change in our individual lives. And it goes beyond turning off the lights and so on. It's about really being ambitious about how do we use our time on this
Hmm.
planet? What is it that we want to really leave behind? And so turn off the lights, recycle the bottles, but reach for the stars, try and make a difference. And you can do it. And it
Absolutely.
starts with small things every day. Start smile at
Ah.
people, hug them. Well, post COVID, maybe. Be kind, out of this sense of interconnectedness with people and with life forms, the animal world, the plant world. We're now in a cultural moment where, because of the gifts the shamans have given us, we're starting to understand that there is a real intelligence in the botanical world that we
In the
can.
universe, in anything that lives, and yes, absolutely, in the botanical plants, in nature,
Yeah. Let
you
me
know.
leave you with an image from two stories from my work with shamans. And uh,
Please do, please do.
the first story is that I noticed when in the 70s that the shamans of the Ash people and the Black Penis people, which were two communities I was looking at in Colombia, after the big windstorms, would go and collect samples from the top of the trees which had fallen down. And believe me, when one of those big trees falls down, a lot of other stuff comes down because it's all
So
fine.
fascinating. Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
don't want to be anywhere close to one of those big trees falling down. Anyway, here they were, cutting
Right.
samples from the top of trees. And he said, because it's richer, it's full of life here. So at some point, we decided to test that. And we did sampling of trees and looking for active, but what are called secondary metabolites, which are the active ingredients, which can be used as biopesticides or for medicine or whatever, at different heights. And what we found is the shaman were right. Sometimes we would look at low branches and low leaves and low flowers and find nothing. And then when we went up, and collected samples from the canopy, they would be incredibly rich of all of this. So they knew something. But probably even more amusing, at some point, we're working in the bee forest in Gabon, which is an amazing forest. And Dior asked us to find a botanical extract that they could use to get rid of melanin uh, spots on hands or face. Right? So we went to one of the local shamans who looked at us as if we were totally crazy, why, what are you doing? Why are you asking me this? What's wrong with a spot on your hand or on your face? Anyway, eventually
Right.
he kind of said, all right, I'll play along. So he took what Terence McKenna would have called heroic dosages of iboga, which is a
Dear.
sacred plant, walked into the forest and came back 2 days later with a resin. Well, eventually we exported something like 80 tons out of Gabon of that resin because Dior, which had one of the best labs to study natural substances, found it to be incredibly effective. So when we asked him, how did you identify this? He said, because I asked the forest. I asked each tree. So there are these crazy pink people who, want to get rid of the spots on their hands. Can you help them? And one of them said, yes, my resin will. And so I'm slightly romanticizing what actually happened and which became an economic opportunity for the local communities because we got them to collect the resin of this tree. But it's an example that I think over the next centuries, our relationship with nature will profoundly change. And it's one of the gifts that shamans have
Mhm.
given us because they are able to transcend our self-imposed cultural limitations and looks at nature as something out there.
That's right. No,
We are it.
absolutely.
We are part stars. We are part our animals, our domestic animals and us are interconnected in ways which go beyond the love and affection that we know. And if they get sick, we get sick. If we get sick, they get sick.
That's
And
right.
this is what we have to come to understand is that we are on a planet which is suffering from a serious case of the flu, and we've created it.
Absolutely.
So let's bring the temperature down. Let's bring healing.
And
Well,
just the simple recognition that we are all connected. I mean, it sounds almost trite at this point, but it's not because there is such profundity um, in that idea, in how we're connected, really quite literally, energetically, on a technological basis. We are through the internet, through all the media that we're connected through. And then, um, on a physical level, I mean, look, I mean, this is not a pleasant example, but look at COVID, that's showing you, it's like, look, you can't. And also, look at pollutants, just because, let's say DDT was used in many countries now, it's banned in most countries, but guess what? That still goes into the atmosphere. Those rain clouds still rain on you. So don't ever think that, something that happens somewhere else does not have a literal impact on you, both a literal, I mean, beyond literal, on every level, energetic, physical, mental, emotional. And I think to start off with even just ourselves being able to connect to our own bodies in a way that's not dissociative, right? Where we're completely focused on our mental engagement and we forget about nurturing our souls or our emotions and not feeling what needs to be processed. And that's just having more compassion for ourselves, and in doing so we have more compassion for the other,
Yeah.
and it comes full circle. And you know the interesting the story that you just shared about the shaman, it just reminds me that again, we have all the opportunity, but until our own consciousness is raised, because what's going to happen, right? Someone could take that res and say, great, now I'm going to patent this, I'm going to make these pharmaceuticals, I'm going to start to make a lot of money, and I'm going to exploit whatever the resources are there, without actually having any sense of reciprocity with creating sustainability for this particular solution. So ultimately it doesn't last that long, or it doesn't actually creates more issues in the community, and then that actually ends up shortchanging yourself. So it's this short-sightedness and this inability to think in systems. I think the whole Buckminster Fuller example was really, really good. And it's we as humanity, and this has nothing to do with which side you're on politically or not, has nothing to do with that. It really has to do with our humanity. And I just want to thank you again, Brando, for your presence, for your energy, and for sharing your experience and doing the amazing work that you're doing.
No,
And I will share the websites and stuff in the show notes, and just please keep doing the work that you're doing. We are, completely supportive of it. And
thank you. Let me leave you with a thought which was very clear to me when I first saw the picture of the Earth rise. You remember in the, whatever it was, in the 70s, 80s, we photographed the Earth emerging. We photographed from the moon.
yes, I remember. Yeah. I mean, I
And
don't remember, but I've seen
somebody
photos.
said, or, I don't remember, but there was a concept that emerged, and that was that there's no more there, there's only here, and there's no more them, there's only us, right? And that seems to be evolving into the general consciousness.
Yes.
So that's where, we can focus on everything that separates us. You're a woman, I'm a man, I'm Italian, Brazilian, whatever it is,
Yes.
our mind can focus on all of that. We have so much more in common.
Absolutely.
And when we explore that, what we discover is that life is so rich, because the more intimacy, the more connection we have, the richer our lives are and the more joyful they are. So I
could not agree with you more. That is a very, very uplifting note to end this podcast on, especially right now. So thank you again, Brando.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.